Hello, BookTube. I have a tag for you today, a tag with which a lot of you are familiar. This is the Has Steve Read It tag that was created by Matthew at Mayberry Book Club a little while ago, in which he pulls down a random selection of books from his shelves and wonders whether or not I've read them, operating under the conceit that I have read a lot. I've read an enormous amount in my life, and therefore you could look at your little personal library and think, has Steve read every single one of these books? Now, of course, that's never going to be true. And despite Matthew's, I think, tongue-in-cheek extrapolations, I have not read more than anyone in the world or in the history of the world. I am not the Samuel Johnson of BookTube. I've just read an enormous amount, that's all. And I'd like to think that I read fairly widely, too. So there is a degree of unpredictability in whether or not I've read a book that you have in your own collection. So that's what this tag was based on, and it went viral. A lot of people liked doing it. It's brought us all a lot of fun. So it seemed only right for me to finish up my tag doing for 2019 by actually making a video response to Mayberry Book Club, to the original version of this tag. I've made video responses for lots of others, but not this one. So I thought I would do that now. And this is a composite response because Matthew went back and did an extra video, sort of addendum, talking about a couple more books. So I'm adding those to the list here. And I'll leave links to both of those videos. So the first one, the first book out of the gate here is a no. There are quite a few French books on both these lists, on the composite list. And the first one is Tropisms by Nathalie Sarraute. It's a tiny little thing it looked like from his video. I have never read it. He described it as a very short prose poem of a novella or something along those lines. I don't know how you could get a more French description of anything than that. Not the sort of thing that I would rush right out and read, and I have not. So we start with a no. Then the next one is an example of something that has come up regularly on these tags, which is not just a book that I have read, but a book where I sit there and wonder what the person could have been thinking to think that I had not read it. You're supposed to at least give these things a fighting chance, and this is one of those books on this list. It's The Holy Sinner by Thomas Mann, and to add insult to injury, Matthew actually shows it in a Penguin, in a Penguin edition. Thomas Mann is the third greatest writer in the 20th century. So, of course, I have read everything by Thomas Mann, including tons and tons of letter collections. I have read The Holy Sinner. So, but that's not the only example of that kind on this list. So, the next one is a very short book. I actually read it in English translation in the same very nice edition that Matthew shows on his video, except unlike him, I opened mine. I didn't leave it wrapped in plastic. It's A Dilemma by Huysmans, and I have never figured out how to read this author. He's not the only one on this list that I haven't figured out how to read by a long shot. The French largely are opaque to me, and this is an example of that. I read the book and thought, okay, well, this has legions of fans. This has people who know it by heart, and I don't get it. I just don't get why anyone would think that way. But I did read it. The next one is extremely annoying. I'm going to try not to go off on a 20-minute rant about it, even now after all these years. It's Tree of Codes by Jonathan Safran-Foer. It's a yes, of course I have read it. Jonathan Safran-Foer, unfortunately, for good or ill, I have for years now have thought for ill, is one of those American authors that you just, if you're in my line of work, you just have to read him. There can't be a book of his that you don't read. Especially a book as firmly ensconced in gimmick as Tree of Codes. Tree of Codes was not anything that Jonathan Safran-Foer labored over, imaginatively speaking. It's not, well, I have a plot, or, I'm out here for your anniversary dinner with all of you, but you know me, in my mind, I'm laboring over a particular plot problem that I have, or Jonathan, when he's working on a book, it's so hard to pull him out of his work. This wasn't anything like that. This was not a creative endeavor in that way. I would argue that a great deal of Jonathan Safran-Foer's work in the last 15 years has not been creative in that way at all. So there's a strong argument to be made for no longer paying attention to him as a literary figure, but I can't do it. If he comes out with a new book, I have to read it. And this is extra gimmicky, this book of his, because as Matthew points out in his video, he constructed it by a series of cutouts in order to craft a book out of someone else's book using sentences, fragments, words, that sort of thing. And that's not the point. That exercise to do that, to make a meta book out of something, is actually a very French thing to do. It belongs on this list. I can see why. I get the feeling that a lot of Matthew's aesthetic tastes lean in the Francophile direction. I'm going to chalk that up to the fact that he has probably never read Trollope, and maybe he should do that right away. But when the French do it, at least I admit that there's active creativity involved, sometimes even genius involved. But Safran-Foer wasn't doing it for that reason. This was not about literature for him. This was about digital books. This was about ebooks. This was his one-person, 3-month gimmicky crusade to make a book that could not be digitized, that could not be made into an ebook. A book that you had to go to a bookstore and buy in person, in a bound version. Utterly ridiculous. Utterly ridiculous. Why is it always the young who are so ostentatiously stupid about change? I don't have any idea, but he knew perfectly well that thanks to the prohibitive cost of making this thing, that he was making something that was going to become instantly collectible, and it did. But literarily, it's completely forgettable, so we'll just move on from it. But it is a yes. And then the next one I confess, this is a little bit mean of me. Someday Matthew will come here to Hyde Cottage, and we will pop a few corks, and we will make a video or two, and you will see that there's no animosity here at all. In our corner of BookTube, I don't think you could have animosity. I don't think it would happen. It's like Jason Harrigan says. He puts it very simply, and at least in this corner of BookTube, I honestly do believe it's true. He says BookTube or book people are much the nicest people. I think that in some ways that, of course, is horribly untrue. You can meet lots of them that are the worst people in the world. All you have to do is spend too much time, i.e. any time at all, on book Twitter, and you will see how horrible book people can be. But you get the right group. I think it's kind of amazing that we have hundreds and hundreds of us that are all basically on the same wavelength. Then you'll see what he means, and you'll see that he's absolutely right. This tag is a perfect example. Anywhere else on YouTube, I would argue in large parts of BookTube itself, a tag that specifically calls out one person to semi-teasingly ask if they've read every book in the world would have started out with a very noticeable current of mean-spiritedness, and if it had gone viral the way this one did, it would have degenerated into name-calling and mean-spiritedness almost immediately. Exclusively that. Instead, this has been a wonderful, fun time for all involved. And that it's in that spirit that I want to poke fun at Matthew for this next one, because the next one is Ernest Renan's The Life of Jesus, which he refers to as a pretty obscure book, even though he's holding up a modern library edition. I don't know how much Matthew knows about the modern library and its history. I know as much about its history as anyone can know, and I'm telling you, there were no obscure books that were chosen. Not that it would have mattered anyway long before a modern library. This was not an obscure book, in other words. So I have read it. I read the modern library edition as well, and I would also recommend it. In a way, I would recommend it. It's fantasy. It's 90% fantasy, but I would still recommend it, if only because it shows you, much like, for instance, Lord Dunsany or The Worm or Boris, it shows you the nature of fantasy at the time. It gives you a sort of fantasy zeitgeist dipstick to measure. It's a fascinating book, whether you're a Christian or not, no matter where you are on the spectrum. I would recommend it. So it's a yes, obscure as it is. And then the next one is a no. The next one is a rather famous little work of smut, of erotica by Apollinaire. And I've done my due diligence with Apollinaire, and I have forced myself to read the verses. But that's as far as I'll go. Okay, I'm not required to read erotica by anybody, and I'm certainly not going to do it here. So that one's a no. Although the I just want to throw in a little side note here that the idea that anything is completely untranslatable, that a pun is untranslatable. Anyway, I have not read it, nor do I have any intention of reading it. Then the next one is a little bit tricky. I might almost say that it's a no, but it is actually a yes. It's Letters to the Lady Upstairs by Proust, which has an American version of Letters to the Neighbor. Matthew points out that perhaps there was a bit of political correctness involved in changing the addressee. But I have read the book in, again, a vain attempt to understand the appeal of this author. No French author has more appeal. This author, there are people who have the whole of remembrance of things past in French by memory. There are people who absolutely swear by this author, and I just don't get it. I have never seen anything that even remotely tingles my senses to give me an idea of, all right, well, it's not your wavelength, but at least now you see a wavelength. I don't see any wavelength at all. I don't get why this author is so venerated. And unlike modern authors who have bandwagons that people jump on, when it comes to someone like Proust, when it comes to someone whose reputation is so wide, I'm not 100% willing to just declare that I'm right and 30 million Frenchmen are wrong. I'm willing, in other words, to concede that there may, in fact, be a wavelength here that I have just, in a whole lifetime of looking, never found. But one of the things that bothers me about that, whether it's Russian literature, certain Russian figures, or French figures, or whoever it is, a certain very eminent living Japanese writer comes to mind. When no matter who it is, when the tidal wave is this greater than any bandwagon could be, and sustained over years, I keep a light on in the window. I keep a door open for the idea that sooner or later, somehow, the penny will drop and I will understand. And one of the things I do with authors like that is to religiously read everything in as many translations as I can, and in the original, if I can, in order to, in some way, maybe figure it out. So this one counts as a yes, even though I don't think I have ever read the edition that Matthew holds up, a UK edition called Letters to the Lady Upstairs. I don't think I've ever seen that particular edition, but I've read the book, so I'm going to count it as a yes. Then the next one is also a yes. It's also French. It's Michele Houellebecq's Serotonin, his latest quivering, lukewarm slab of crap that I read it. I read the very edition that Matthew holds up. I read the advanced copy. We saw it on this channel, and then I read the finished copy. And I had to resist the impulse that I've had with this crappy author. I've had the impulse now 2 or 3 times when his latest lukewarm slab of garbage comes onto the English language market. In the last 2 or 3 times, I've had the impulse to contact friends of mine and get a French version. But this is not a case where there's a wavelength of genuine quality, and I just don't know what it is. This is Karl Ove Knausgaard. This is an author who is just a bandwagon. That's all. There is no worth here whatsoever, in English or in French. So I read Serotonin. I knew immediately. I knew in three pages the rancid, stupid, fly-blown, elementary school, quote-unquote, point that the author was trying to make. And all that was left once I knew that, once I saw that clear as day, once I saw it as if I had written it on an outline sheet myself for NaNoWriMo, once I saw that on page 3 or 4 or however early it was, all that was left for me to do was watch him labor the bellows for 300 pages. Just watch him labor the bellows. The only person in the room who doesn't know that everyone else knows what he's doing. Instead he's laboring the bellows. He's got this look on his face of, wait till they find out how clever I'm being. When everyone in the room knows what he's doing. He's the only one who doesn't. It's just, oh, no, no, now I'm going to go over here and do this. Oh, boy, it's all building to something, though. Wait till you see my genius. No, 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 no. No. The emperor has no baguettes. This is just a gigantic piece of garbage. But anyway, then Matthew added 2 more books, both of them French. I swear. Trollope. Stat. Okay? or George Eliot, maybe, if you want to stay as close to French as English letters will get you. But this much francophile reading cannot be healthy for someone who also has a cat. Anyway, the next one is a no. This is Normance by Celine. I have tried again with this author many times. I think this author is just unbelievably formless and lazy. I've read a great deal of stuff in English, a great deal of stuff in French, and I don't get it. I just don't get it. And the entitlement as well, the arrogance that I guess goes along with being a person of letters in the French Parisian world, a flaneur with a book under his arm or whatever. Isn't this author the guy who said about the Nobel Prize, every candy ass in Europe has one, where's mine? That was decades ago. And I remember even at the time thinking, well, maybe you don't deserve one. Maybe that's why you don't have one. Anyway, this Normance could be the thing, could be the Rosetta Stone, the thing I'm looking for to get on the Celine bandwagon, to get on the wavelength. Maybe I'm missing out, but I haven't read it, and I'm not rushing to my local foreign bookstore to get a copy. I'm not rushing to do that. And then the last one, I'm in his own defense. I'm not going to poke fun because this is just too enormous. In his own defense, he says that I have certainly read this book. So what it's doing on this list, I don't really know, but he's absolutely right. I have certainly read A Sentimental Education by Flaubert, and so should you. I might point out. I know that I've been having a great deal of fun poking the elbow at all of this French stuff on this list, but Flaubert is great. Sentimental Education is great. Matthew asked particularly if I'd read the Perdita Burlingame translation, which was the translator of the old mass market paperback that he shows in his video. I have, in fact, read that. I've read that exact paperback. I would ordinarily ask Matthew to, in a private email, I would ask him to look for a particular sign in the back of that mass market paperback that would demonstrate whether or not it was, in fact, the copy that I read. But in this particular case, I know what happened to that copy. No one's ever going to be reading it again. But I've read that. I've also read every other, as far as I know, every other English translation of Sentimental Education. And it would be great if there were a new one every year, just to try and bring this great, great novel to more people's attention. It's incredible and should be read by everybody. So there you go. There you go. That is the Mayberry Book Club edition of the Has Steve Read It viral tag. About time we got to the founder of the whole thing. And if you were keeping track at home, you know that his tally for the 2 versions together is 3. So the reigning queen of the universe is in no danger whatsoever. And may she reign forever. But still, I couldn't let the year end out. I mean, I'm rapidly wrapping up my year here for social media, for YouTube, and for you. But I couldn't let the year go without doing a response video to the video that started it all. So I'm gonna wrap this up, but I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.